Is this even an area that government should have its hands in? Like, this just seems like this would be much better solved if it was actually through a true free market, private type of solution.
Well, I think that could certainly be a viable option. You would likely want to keep within the old age security. There is something called the guaranteed income supplement that's intended for like low income individuals and very severe needs when they're elderly. I think that would be beneficial to keep. I would personally be open to doing away with OAS and the CPP. I just do not think that's politically viable in Canada.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
All right, and on to today's episode. We have a fun one in store, and it's talking about all things federal bureaucrats, but not just what we're seeing here happen in America with Doge, but also elsewhere. And how about we go to our neighbors to the north? We're going to talk about raising the age of eligibility for pensions, specifically up there in Canada. Joining me today is Young Voices contributor William Dunstan. William, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Absolutely. Looking forward to this conversation. But before we jump into all things pension eligibility, William, which I know the audience is, they're at the edge of their seats. Let's do the audience a favor first. Introduce yourself here to the audience. And why is this an area that you're so focused and passionate about?
Yeah, so I'll introduce myself. I'm currently a Master of Public Policy student at the University of Calgary in Canada. Before that, I spent a couple of years working in the think tank industry in Canada, working on topics including economic growth, rural development, and demographics. And that's some of that work is what piqued my interest in the age of pension eligibility in Canada and the broader question of how do we adopt to having an aging population. That's something you're seeing in Canada, in the US, and in a lot of other Western countries. It's a topic that has big implications for our economy, for our public finances, and for our social services. So I just think it's a very important topic.
Yeah, well, and you look over, you mentioned other countries, right? I know right now one of the main areas out in the the Eastern Pacific, right? You got Japan, you got China. They are aging populations, and also, I mean, you look at China, for example. They instituted a very draconian policy for decades, the one-child policy, which now they're really paying for this in a negative standpoint as the aging population continues to age because life happens. And all of a sudden, there isn't a group of new citizens to fill that void as the older population ages out. So we're seeing this in those other countries, but let's go right here in the North American continent, right? So United States of America, we're seeing this conversation take place specifically with Doge and other areas as well. But up in Canada, this has been another conversation taking place. You know, Justin Trudeau, he's everybody's favorite up there. Kidding. And you've seen a very much a return back to, dare I say, some common sense practices in Canada when you're looking at both the way you deal with these different these different question marks in terms of pensions and eligibility. So just kind of set the stage for us. What does it look like in Canada? Why is this a big deal in Canada specifically? And kind of where do you think this is going to start heading as we go towards raising this eligibility?
Yeah, so we'll start off by just giving an overview of what our public pension programs are in Canada, because it's similar to the United States, but done a little differently. So we have two main programs. The first is called Old Age Security, which is funded entirely through tax payments into general revenue, and that's paid out to all Canadians. It starts getting cut off at a certain income level, but that income level is quite high. Then you have the Canada Pension Plan, which is funded through contributions by individuals to the program. However, those contributions are mandatory, so it's a payroll tax, but the amount you pay in is tied to the contributions you eventually get. And right now, for both of them, the standard age of eligibility to start getting those benefits is 65. You can do a little bit of playing around with the exact year you start, like you could start at 62 or start at 67 and get a little more benefits or a little less. But the basic idea is at 65, you start getting those benefits. And well, what's happened is that was set up in around the 1960s. But as we were just talking about, in a lot of countries across the world, you've had significant demographic change with them. I know you were mentioning the example of China, where they have an aging population and not enough people coming in to replace the population that's getting older. That's what we're seeing in Canada and the US, not to nearly as much of an extreme because we didn't have that draconian one-child policy, but we are seeing that where we have more and more seniors compared to a smaller working age population. So, and that's particularly why this reform is important. So in Canada, when these programs were set up, people at the age of 65 were expected to live for about another 15 years, and they were about 10% of the population. Now they're expected to live for 20 years at 65, and they're about 20% of the population. So what that means is these programs are being asked to pay for people retirement for a lot longer and for a much larger share of the population at once. And that's just simply not something that's sustainable, and that's starting to become a huge burden on federal public finances here in Canada.
So what's the alternative, William? I know you're talking about raising the age of eligibility, but I mean, my libertarian ethic kicks in here and I start to ask the question, is this even an area that government should have its hands in? Like, this just seems like this would be much better solved if it was actually through a true free market, private type of solution.
Well, that's the thing. I think that could certainly be a viable option. You would likely want to keep within the old age security, there is something called the guaranteed income supplement that is intended for like low income individuals in very severe need when they're elderly. I think that would be beneficial to keep. I would personally be open to doing away with OAS and the CPP. I just do not think that's politically viable in Canada. I think if you're looking at the reforms that actually have a chance of happening, it's raising the retirement age. And that's what you've seen in a lot of Western countries. I know in the US, you've increased the age of eligibility for Social Security in recent years, and there's now a debate about whether it needs to be higher. In the UK, they've increased the age of eligibility. I think some of the Nordic countries are going up to 70 with the age of eligibility for their retirement benefits. So Canada's really lagging behind right now when we're stuck at 65. And I think, it could be beneficial to get rid of these programs and have it done privately. But I think in terms of politically feasible reforms, it's going to be raising the age of eligibility.
So I'm a sales guy by trade, William, and one of the things we talk about in the world of sales is when you get towards the finish line, you start talking about price points. Usually this is where negotiation starts, right? So what if, and here's my dream scenario, right? We go in with the libertarian ethic, we're going to go ahead and privatize this thing. And then on the other side of the aisle, they say, no, don't privatize this thing. Just raise the age of eligibility. Would there be a middle ground from a negotiation standpoint, William, to say, okay, well, how about this? We'll get the best of both worlds. We'll keep the age of eligibility as is. However, you get to opt out. If you want to go towards a private solution, you can. You're not forced on this public option. And if you want to stick in the public option to the worst case scenarios that you outline, the folks who are not doing so well financially, or they have other extra issues, or what's the term, pre-existing conditions, or whatever it may be, that sure, you can jump on the public option. But if I don't want to jump on, I don't have to pay for it. I'm not going to see the benefits. What say you?
Yeah, I think that would certainly be a good option. I certainly like the idea of giving people that option to, like you were saying, the idea of privatizing, letting people plan for their own retirement, make their plans based on their own preferences to spend now or spend when they're older, let them make their own investment choices. But like you were saying, there can be benefits to having that optional public option so that people who, for whatever reason, struggle to invest privately can access a government program that can still help them meet their retirement goals. I think that could very well be a solution. I still think that's likely to be politically challenging. I really don't think there's political appetite, at least in Canada, for doing away with the mandatory public program, unfortunately. But yeah, I think that's certainly a feasible middle ground, just from a policy perspective, if not politically.
Well, let's talk about this, because this seems to be a recurring theme here that you're bringing up, is that it doesn't seem politically viable in Canada. What is that? Why is it that the neighbors to the north here are allergic to liberty and freedom?
Well, I'd say we're not that much more allergic than the United States. I think you have similar challenges when you're having those debates about reform and entitlement programs in the States. But yeah, I think it's what you're seeing in Canada is what you see in any country. When people bring in a public program, it does provide a certain sense of security. So even if people would be better off having a private program and being able to make those choices themselves, some segment of the population is just really attached to that security of having a government provided program. So that makes it politically strong, and it's difficult to do away with, right? It's what you always see whenever a politician suggesting cutting a program, even if on balance it's a good idea, you'll have their opposition trot out, the worst case scenarios and all the, all the pictures of like the people who will be worse off from this in the most extreme example possible to get public sympathy. So it's a challenge on that side.
Hey folks, I want to take a moment to talk about something that has truly changed my life, and that is Cardio Miracle, our incredible studio sponsor. Now, I'll be honest, when I first heard about Cardio Miracle and their claims about improving heart health, I was skeptical. But after using it for just about 2 months, I was absolutely blown away by the results. First, my blood pressure went from being consistently around 140/90 to a much more healthier and manageable 120/80. And my resting heart rate dropped from the low 70s to the high 50s. And I couldn't believe it. But the benefits didn't stop there. I started sleeping better, and I felt more energized at the gym, and my heart felt the best it's felt in years. And it's not just me. Hundreds of you, our amazing listeners, have reached out to share your own incredible experiences with Cardio Miracle. So, what is Cardio Miracle, and how does it work? It's a carefully crafted supplement that harnesses the power of nitric oxide to support optimal heart function. So, by increasing nitric oxide levels in your blood, Cardio Miracle helps relax your blood vessels, improve circulation, and it protects your heart from damage. It's like giving your heart the support it needs to function at its best. And here's the best part. We've got an exclusive offer just for you, our loyal listeners here at The Brian Nichols Show. When you head over to cardiomiracle.com and use code TBNS at checkout, you'll get an extra 15% discount on your order. Plus, with their 100% money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So, if you're ready to take control of your heart health and experience the life-changing benefits of Cardio Miracle for yourself, just click the link in the show notes or video description. Trust me, your heart will thank you. And don't wait another day to prioritize your health. Join the tens of thousands of folks who have already discovered the Cardio Miracle difference. Head to cardiomiracle.com now and use code TBNS for 15% off your order. Your journey to a happier and healthier heart starts today. And now, let's get back to the show. Well, it's definitely a challenge, right? And I get that. I guess, I look at where we are right now in America, and we are seeing like the ultimate reversal of policy that we've probably seen in decades, right? With Donald Trump going into office, Elon Musk jumping in with Doge, and now we're peeling back the curtain. We're exposing the sunlight to the cockroaches, and they're scrambling, right? And while there is very much a real reaction from, I would say, more of the, I don't want to call them the left, because yes, the left obviously is freaking out, but I would say more of the status quo-itarians, if that's a term, the folks who just were like, well, this is how things have always been. Why are we changing this? Because probably they're getting benefits from the gravy train, but I digress. But we're seeing that there is, from a public perspective, very much an appetite for the first time. I forget the specific metric, but for the first time in, I think it was like over a decade, Americans have a more positive vision for the future of America. They're feeling more positive about our prospects. So the fact that this optimism all of a sudden has swept through the American public after years of people saying things are getting worse and worse and worse. That's one data point. But then on the other side, Donald Trump, even though he's going through in like a Javier Milei with his chainsaw. By the way, I got to give a special shout out to my good buddy Dorian for my little Javier Milei Christmas present. You can see this on the screen here. But he's got his chainsaw, right? And he's cutting down these different federal bureaucracies. And with that, the benefits therein that come from those bureaucracies. But he's maintaining very much a positive approval rating in the mid 50 percentile range when, just for context, folks, Joe Biden couldn't get above, I think it was 44% for over 3 years of his administration. So it does speak to, I think, where at least the American public, William, they're starting to have a little bit of change of heart. And let's just segue back up to our neighbors to the north there in Canada. I don't know. Justin Trudeau seems like he's been definitely getting a lot of slings and arrows, and rightfully deserved, from the Canadian public. And that probably goes back to with the whole trucker protests in Ottawa. Fast forward to today, you got the conservative gent there. I forget his name on the right, he's standing up, fighting back against Trudeau. It seems like he might be the next prime minister. Help me out there, by the way, when I turn it over to you, what his name is, 'cause I can't remember. But it does seem that maybe there is an opportunity right now for Canada to kind of follow in the footsteps of America.
Yeah, so the conservative fellow's name is Pierre Poilievre, who's likely going to win the next election. And it's interesting when you talk about all the optimism in the United States, because I find it's really kind of the reverse in Canada. There's a lot of negativity, a sense that Canada's on the decline, a lot of pessimism, and it's not. I think it's people are a bit overreacting to recent circumstances, but it's not totally ill-informed. We have had a stagnant economy over the past 10 years, just not grown very well under the Trudeau Liberal government. We've had rising crime. We're seeing growing geopolitical tensions. With the Trump administration, with the potential of a trade war, that's potentially a very negative impact on the Canadian economy with how much of our international trade is tied up in the United States. So there's a lot of pessimism there. And I think that may also be that's an interesting thing because I could see it going either way when we're talking about making those bold, liberty-minded small government reforms. Because on one hand, when you have that pessimism and people feel more insecure, you can have people more wanting protection from the government, right? It can be hard to sell people on we're going to reduce a government program that protects you or benefits you when you feel insecure about your future. At the same time, I think there could also be a potential though for more of those bold reforms, right? I think what you often see is it's during those periods of economic stagnation, during those periods of difficulty, that people are actually willing to have those difficult discussions about what the government should look like, what's realistic for the government to be providing. So I think when we're going into an environment where there's just a lot of stress on Canada's economy, on its public finances, I think you could very well see more Canadians open to having a real debate and being open to bold reforms on things like our retirements, our public pension system. With Polyev, it's interesting because he has been campaigning very much on an idea of small government, cutting spending, cutting taxes. But what I found interesting, he hasn't provided a lot of specific details on what he's going to do. I think part of that is just on the strategy side. You don't want to go out and say, I'm going to cut this program because then the other party can attack you on it. But I guess I'm really interested to see what a Pierre Poilievre-led conservative government actually does in Canada. What happened the last time we had a conservative government, which Poilievre was a cabinet minister under former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, is they made some reforms, but they were quite incremental. So I expect that Poilievre will be a bit more bold than the previous conservative government, but I'm very curious to see what direction he ultimately goes in. And I can't say I can fully predict the future about what's going to happen. I think we're going into an environment where it will be more politically feasible than it has been recently to do things like reform our retirement income systems and cut public spending, but I'm not sure if we'll go quite as far as you're seeing in the United States.
Or William, you become our 51st state and we call it a day. No, I'm just teasing. So William, that's the groundwork, right, of where you guys are. Let's talk about what you think is going to be the most realistic outcomes here, right? I mean, I guess the answer is going to be we're going to raise the age of eligibility, but I mean, beyond that, do you see that this conversation might turn into something more in Canada? And if so, what direction do you think Canadians are going to go?
So what do you mean a bit by turning into something more?
Yeah, so the ethic, right? This I'll call it the Doge ethic here in America, where your average person, they start to see, they again peel back that layer of the onion and they say, ooh, wow, there's a lot here we got to unpack, right? So do you feel that once you start to make those incremental steps, as you mentioned, but in this case, I mean, it kind of is a big step for Canada, now raising the age of eligibility, if we do go that path, will that is that the stepping stone, or is that the proverbial, the first domino to knock down the other dominoes to start maybe opening up more substantive changes that are much more in line with the Doge ethic? Or is there just something about the Canadian populace that they are very much adverse to disrupting the Canadian status quo?
Yeah, so I'll say two things on that, and thanks for clarifying that. So responding to your question about the Canadian populace, I think there is a little bit of a difference. So I do think Canadians are one more averse to changing the status quo, and I think are just two a bit more attached to their publicly provided programs. And part of that is that since about the end of World War II, the Canadian government and primarily Canadian politicians from the Liberal Party have really struggled to create a national identity, for Canada that's separate from the United States. So a lot of our patriotism that exists in Canada really emphasizes how we're not Americans. And one of the things that, the Canadian elite settled on was, well, we have more generous social programs. We have a universal healthcare system. We have all these benefits provided by the government. So I think you have a lot of Canadians who, unfortunately, have quite a bit of an emotional attachment and a patriotic attachment to some of those government programs. But getting back to your question, I do think we're entering an environment where there's more opportunities to make reform. I was talking about retirement income programs a lot, but there's other areas where where I think it's very possible we'll start to see reform in healthcare. So, for example, as you probably know, Canada has a single-payer healthcare system. That has not worked terribly well. There's a lot of inefficiencies in the program, and it's delivering poor results. I don't think we'd ever move to like a primarily private system like you have in the United States, but there are other countries in the world that have different versions of universal healthcare. You have Germany, the Netherlands, Singapore, Switzerland, and all of them, there's some private element within the system where there's some level of competition and market-based mechanisms. So you have that everyone's healthcare is provided for, but you still get some of those market elements, so you get a more efficient system. In Canada, it's very like politically taboo to suggest any move away from single payer healthcare, even if it's like keeping universal benefits, but just adding some market mechanisms to it. I think as we're seeing this greater economic stagnation, these greater economic challenges, and like I was saying earlier, that willingness to have difficult conversations, I think we'll see Canadian government more willing to make changes on healthcare, for example, to bring in those modest reforms to get them more in a market-based direction. I don't really see Canada going in a full, Javier Milei or what Doge is potentially becoming in the United States. I think, unfortunately, that's not the political environment in Canada, but there's definitely going to be, over the next few years, a real impetus and opportunity for reform-minded, small government-minded politicians in Canada to make important changes that are overdue.
So I'm going to give my final thoughts before I turn things over to you to bring us home here, William. And I'm going to use an analogy, metaphor. It's one of the two. Whatever one is not the same as like or is that simile? Doesn't matter. Anyways, for today's conversation, I'm going to make a comparison. There we go. And the comparison is going to be, and don't take this the wrong way, I'm viewing Canada kind of as the morbidly obese guy who's like 400 plus pounds. And they're arguing with the nutritionist saying, I don't need to cut back on my sweets and sugar. Like I cut back on eating the potato chips. I'm already doing the right things. And as the nutritionist, I say, yeah, and you're still 400 pounds. Now I can say this confidently as a guy who used to weigh 385 pounds when I lost over 180 pounds. So I saw that for me to lose weight, it took some really big changes, right? I had to start eating right across the board. I had to start getting off my butt and going outside, walking, working out, moving, just doing stuff, right? And it took 2 years of hard work, of sacrifice, and actually, in order to obtain a positive outcome for yours truly. And I'm looking at Canada as kind of like they're pushing back. I used to work in the fitness industry for a while, and I would see this all the time. I'd have a very unhealthy, morbidly obese person come into the gym, and they're like, yeah, maybe we'll talk about making some changes. And then I'm like, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. Here's your plan. And they're like, no, I don't want to do that. I'll start with doing one thing out of the 30 things I should do. And I'm like, that's fine. I mean, yes, you're going to be healthier, air quotes, by cutting out the chips, right? But if you're still drinking all your calories with sugary soda or eating candy or things with zero nutritional value, sorry, you're not going to get healthier. So I guess I make a sales pitch to the Canadian public. Please don't be a morbidly obese 400 plus pound guy, because things aren't going to get better if you're only doing these little incremental changes. And hey, start looking at different options. Start considering that maybe there is going to need to be some sacrifice. We're feeling that right now in America, right? Like folks are starting to freak out because, oh no, I'm a federal worker and I lost my guaranteed pension and my guaranteed job. Sorry, your average person, that's called real life. And there is this very big disconnect between what the average person in the private sector has to deal with here in America versus the very cushy, very insulated from real life market forces jobs in the federal bureaucracies and therein. So, and then you extrapolate that down to what you're talking about in Canada with all these different benefits, all these different, these little attaboys, and call them bribes, call them what you will. But there is very much a real, I think, hill that both the Canadian public, but also like the Canadian politicians have to get over if you want to make things better. Otherwise, William, I'm just saying, maybe Canada as our 51st state might be a better idea. That's my final thoughts. What do you have for us on our end as you bring us home today?
Yeah, so I'll say a couple things. Not a fan of the 51st state idea, but I am a fan of closer economic ties with the United States. Let's get rid of the remaining protections that we have on cross-border industries. Let's get a general labor movement agreement in place. I think that would be great. The other thing I'll say is I think one silver lining of the difficulties that Canada's having right now, our economic challenges, our potential trade war, our growing burdensome debt, is I think if you use the analogy of Canada as that morbidly obese person, I think what could very well happen is in the next few years we're gonna be forced to make those changes whether we like them or not, right? Like it's gonna be a hard sell politically to Canadians to do it, but if we see a trade war where our GDP drops by several percentage points, we keep having stagnant productivity, we keep having burdensome debt, at some point governments are going to have to start cutting back those benefits whether people like it or not. So going back to my earlier point, I think these challenging times in Canada could end up having a positive benefit in the long run by making Canadians make those difficult decisions about how much government they can really afford to have. And the answer is less than what we currently have.
William Dunstan, this has been a great conversation about raising the age of eligibility for Canadian pensions, and across the board, we had some really cool conversations about just like incentive structures, public policy, and the likes, which, hey, William, it's great having you on the show as a Young Voices contributor. I know Young Voices, they do amazing work getting folks like you to the table and having these conversations, so shout out to Young Voices. William, where can folks go ahead and reach out to you if they want to continue this conversation, learn some more about public policy, or convince you that Canada should be, in fact, our 51st state?
Yeah, I mean, people can definitely reach on to me on Twitter, or X as it's now known, I guess. That's my main platform for talking about public policy, Canadian and American. So definitely happy to continue the conversation with anyone in the audience.
Perfect. All right, William Dunstan from Young Voices. Really appreciate you joining us here on the show today. And with that, folks, we're going to go ahead. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or you want to continue the conversation, head down below into the comments. Let us know your thoughts. Do you think that Canada needs to take a big, hard right turn? If so, let us know your thoughts. Or if you think Canada is on the right path where they've been doing the public options, let us know. And definitely have some fun down there in the comments. And you can follow yours truly at B Nichols Liberty, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, wherever it is you consume your podcasting platforms, your video platforms. You can find the Brian Nichols Show. Just hit that subscribe button, hit that little notification bell so you don't miss a single time we have a brand new episode go live. With that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for William Dunstan. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.